The gunshot that killed Ethan Reed's younger brother echoed in his mind every sunrise, though 4 years had passed since that brutal morning in 1872. Now, in the autumn of 1876, Ethan stood on the porch of his ranch outside Raton, New Mexico Territory, watching the dusty road that led into town, his world as silent and colorless as the grave he visited every Sunday. He had built this ranch with his own hands after the war, hoping to create something peaceful, something that might heal the wounds left by too much death. But the quiet here felt more like punishment than paradise, and he wondered sometimes if he was truly living or simply waiting to join those who had already gone. The letter had arrived 3 weeks ago, creased and travel-worn, bearing news he had never expected. An old Army friend, Captain Marcus Whitfield, had written to inform him about a mail-order bride arrangement that had gone awry. The woman, Katherine Elmore, had been corresponding with a rancher named William Thornton, but Thornton had died suddenly of pneumonia before she arrived from Pennsylvania. The stage company had already been paid, and Katherine was en route with nowhere to go. Marcus, knowing Ethan's solitary situation and perhaps hoping to pull his old friend from the darkness he had sunk into, suggested that Ethan might consider meeting her at the station, offering at least temporary shelter until other arrangements could be made. Ethan had crumpled the letter, thrown it in the fire, then pulled it out before the flames consumed it completely. He smoothed the singed edges and read it again. The idea seemed absurd. He was 32 years old, scarred inside and out with no music left in his soul. What could he offer a woman who had traveled across the country hoping for a new life? His ranch was prosperous enough, his cattle healthy, his land well watered by the streams that flowed down from the mountains. But he himself felt like an empty shell, going through the motions of existence without really participating in life. Yet something in Marcus's words had lodged in his chest like a burr. Perhaps it was the thought of a woman alone in a strange territory with no one to turn to. Or perhaps it was the memory of his mother's voice telling him that a man's character was measured by how he treated those who could do nothing for him in return. Either way, he found himself saddling his horse at dawn on the day Katherine Elmore was scheduled to arrive on the stage from Santa Fe. The town of Raton was growing steadily as the railroad pushed through the territory. The streets bustled with miners, ranchers, merchants, and the occasional gambler looking to strike it rich at one of the saloons. Ethan tied his horse outside the stage office and leaned against the wall, his hat pulled low, watching the road to the north. He felt ridiculous, his heart beating faster than it had in years, nervous as a green recruit before his first battle. The stage arrived in a cloud of dust, the horses snorting and stamping as the driver pulled them to a halt. 2 men in business suits disembarked first, then an elderly woman clutching a carpet bag, and finally, a young woman stepped down, her traveling dress dusty but neatly kept, her dark hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet. She looked around with wide eyes, not frightened exactly but clearly uncertain, her fingers gripping a worn leather case. Ethan straightened, suddenly aware of how rough he must look after years of ranch work and solitude. His hands were calloused, his face weathered, his clothes clean but plain. He started to turn away, thinking this was a mistake, but then the young woman's gaze found his, and something in her expression stopped him. She looked directly at him with clear gray eyes, and though she could not have known who he was, she smiled slightly, as if acknowledging a fellow human being in a strange place. He walked over, removing his hat. Up close, he could see she was younger than he had expected, perhaps 24 or 25, with a delicate face marked by intelligence and determination. There were shadows under her eyes from the long journey, but she held herself with quiet dignity. "Miss Elmore?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. Her eyes widened slightly. "Yes, I am Katherine Elmore, are you?" She trailed off, confusion crossing her features. "Ethan Reid, I have a ranch outside town. Captain Whitfield asked me to meet you." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with this whole situation. "I am sorry about William Thornton. I knew him a little. He was a good man." Catherine's face fell, and he saw grief there, though he suspected it was more for lost hopes than for a man she had never met in person. "Thank you. I received the telegram only a few days before I left. I thought about turning back, but everything I had was already sold or given away. There seemed little point in returning to a place where I no longer belonged." The honesty in her voice surprised him. Most women in her situation would have hidden behind polite evasions. "I can offer you work at my ranch if you are willing. I need someone to help with the household. The cooking and cleaning have gotten away from me these past years. It would not be charity. I would pay fair wages, and you would have your own room. It would give you time to decide what you want to do next." Katherine studied him carefully, and he felt the weight of her assessment. He wondered what she saw when she looked at him, if she could see the hollowness inside, the places where life used to be. Finally, she nodded. "That seems a reasonable arrangement, Mr. Reid. I appreciate your kindness to a stranger. Call me Ethan," he said, taking her leather case. "And I am not being kind. I genuinely need the help." The ride to the ranch took 2 hours, through countryside that grew increasingly beautiful as they left the town behind. Katherine sat straight in the wagon seat beside him, taking in the landscape with what seemed like genuine appreciation. The cottonwoods along the creek were turning gold, and the mountains in the distance wore caps of early snow. "It is lovely here," she said quietly. "Different from Pennsylvania, but lovely in its own way." Ethan grunted an acknowledgement. He had stopped seeing the beauty years ago, but hearing her say it made him look around with slightly fresher eyes. "It is a good land if you can handle the isolation. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles north." "I grew up on a farm," Katherine said. "I am accustomed to quiet." But as they rode, Ethan noticed that Katherine hummed softly under her breath, a melody he did not recognize. The sound was so unexpected, so out of place in his silent world, that it made something in his chest tighten painfully. When had he last heard music? When had he last wanted to? The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a solid structure, built from logs and stone, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. The barn and outbuildings were well maintained, the corrals sturdy. Ethan took pride in keeping everything in good repair, even if he took no joy in it. Katherine said nothing as he helped her down from the wagon, but he saw her taking in every detail. The house was clean enough on the outside, the yard swept, the garden area weeded, though nothing grew there now except a few hardy herbs that had seeded themselves. It was inside that the neglect showed. He carried her case up onto the porch and pushed open the door. The front room was sparsely furnished with a table, chairs, and a settee covered in dust. The fireplace was clean but cold, the windows smudged, the floor in need of sweeping. He watched as Katherine looked around, her expression carefully neutral. "I know it is not what you expected," he said quietly. She turned to him, and her smile was genuine if a bit tired. "Mr. Reid, Ethan, I expected to be sleeping in the street tonight. This is more than adequate. Show me where I can put my things, and then perhaps you can tell me what needs doing most urgently." He showed her to the bedroom that had been meant for guests, a small space with a bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. It was clean, at least, the linens fresh because he had made an effort before leaving that morning. Katherine set down her case and turned to him. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have been very kind when you had no obligation to be. I will not disappoint you." Ethan nodded, backing toward the door. "I will be in the barn if you need anything. There is food in the pantry such as it is. Make yourself at home." He fled before she could respond, suddenly overwhelmed by having another person in the house, by the subtle scent of lavender that clung to her despite the dust of travel, by the way her presence seemed to fill the empty spaces he had grown accustomed to navigating alone. In the barn, he busied himself with unnecessary tasks, checking on the horses, inspecting tack that did not need inspecting, anything to avoid going back into the house. But as the afternoon wore on, he became aware of sounds drifting from the open windows. The swish of a broom, the splash of water, and then, clear as a bell, Catherine's voice raised in song. She had a beautiful voice, pure and strong, singing something he thought might be a hymn, though he could not make out all the words. The sound carried across the yard, and his horses lifted their heads to listen, ears pricked forward. Ethan stood frozen, a curry comb in his hand, as something long dormant stirred inside him. When had he last heard singing? His mother had sung while she worked, and his brother Samuel had played the fiddle in the evenings before the war. After Samuel's death, Ethan had packed away the fiddle and let silence claim his home. Now this stranger was filling it with music as naturally as breathing, and he did not know whether to be grateful or angry at the intrusion. He stayed in the barn until hunger drove him inside as the sun set. The transformation stunned him. The front room gleamed, the windows clear, the floor swept, the furniture dusted and arranged more pleasantly. Something savory simmered on the stove, filling the house with a smell that made his mouth water. Katherine stood at the counter, slicing bread with efficient movements, her sleeves rolled up and an apron tied around her waist. She looked up as he entered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I hope you do not mind. I found flour and some dried beef and vegetables in the pantry. I made a stew." "I do not mind," Ethan managed. "You did not have to do all this today. You must be exhausted from traveling." Katherine shrugged. "I needed to keep busy. The stew needs another half-hour. There is hot water if you want to wash up." They ate in awkward silence, though the food was the best thing Ethan had tasted in months. He had been subsisting on beans and hardtack mostly, too tired at the end of each day to make much effort. Katherine ate delicately, but he noticed she cleaned her plate, hunger winning out over manners. "This is very good," he said finally. "Thank you. You are welcome. I enjoy cooking when I have decent ingredients to work with." She paused, then added, "I notice there is a piano in the corner. Does it work?" Ethan followed her gaze to the instrument covered with a sheet. "It belonged to my mother. I do not know if it still holds a tune. No one has played it in years. May I try it?" There was eagerness in her voice that made him look at her more closely. Her whole face had lit up, suddenly animated in a way it had not been before. "If you want." He stood and pulled the sheet away, revealing the upright piano beneath. Dust puffed up, making him cough. "It probably needs tuning." Katherine crossed to it like someone greeting an old friend. She sat on the bench and ran her fingers reverently over the keys before pressing down. The note rang out, slightly flat but recognizable. She played a scale, wincing at a few sour notes, but then began a simple melody, adjusting as she went to accommodate the out-of-tune strings. The music filled the room, spilled out into the evening air. Ethan stood transfixed, watching her fingers dance across the keys, watching her face transform with joy. She played for perhaps 10 minutes, simple pieces that required no sheet music, and when she finished, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I have not played in months," she said softly. I had to sell my piano before I left. This one is lovely, even out of tune." "You play beautifully," Ethan heard himself say. Katherine smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "My mother taught me. She said music was the language of the soul, that it could say things words could not." She stood, suddenly self-conscious. "I am sorry. I got carried away. I should clean up the dishes." "Leave them," Ethan said. "You have done enough today." That night, lying in his bed, Ethan listened to the silence and found it different than before. The house felt alive again, inhabited, and he could not decide if that was a good thing or not. He had grown comfortable in his isolation, his grief, his self-imposed penance for surviving when Samuel had not. Catherine's presence, her music, her easy smile, all of it threatened to crack the shell he had built around himself. And he was not sure he was ready for that. The next morning, he woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. He dressed quickly and came out to find Katherine already at work, her hair neatly pinned, her dress crisp despite being one of only a few she must own. She looked up as he entered. "Good morning. I hope I did not wake you. I am used to early hours." "You did not wake me," Ethan said, pouring himself coffee. "I am usually up before dawn." They ate breakfast together, and Ethan found himself watching her covertly. In the morning light, he could see the fine lines of her face, the determined set of her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes. She had come west to marry a stranger, to build a new life from nothing, and that took courage he could only respect. "What needs doing today?" Katherine asked as she cleared the plates. "I need to check the cattle in the north pasture. There are repairs to make on some fencing." "It will take most of the day." He hesitated, then added, "You do not need to fill every moment with work. You are still settling in." "I prefer to be busy," Katherine said. "If you have no objection, I would like to tackle the rest of the house, and perhaps the garden area. It looks like it could be productive with some attention." Ethan shrugged. "Do as you like. Everything here is in need of attention." He rode out feeling strangely unsettled, as if his carefully ordered world had been tilted on its axis. All day as he worked, he found himself thinking about the woman back at the ranch, wondering what she was doing, whether she was singing again. The thought should have annoyed him, but instead it created an odd warmth in his chest that he did not want to examine too closely. When he returned at dusk, the house glowed with lamplight. Katherine had been busy indeed. The kitchen gleamed, the pantry reorganized, and she had somehow managed to beat the dust from the curtains and rehang them. More than that, she had taken cuttings from the wild roses that grew along the creek and arranged them in a jar on the table. The splash of color seemed to brighten the entire room. "You have been working hard," Ethan observed, washing the dust from his hands and face. "I like to see things neat," Katherine replied, setting out plates for dinner. "I hope you do not mind the flowers. They will only last a few days, but they were so lovely I could not resist." "I do not mind." And surprisingly, he did not. The roses were the first decoration the house had seen since his mother's death, and they seemed to honor her memory rather than disturb it. Over dinner, Katherine asked about the ranch, and Ethan found himself talking more than he had in years. He explained about his cattle, the best grazing areas, his plans to expand the herd next spring. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions that showed she understood more about ranching than he had expected. "My father raised dairy cows," she explained. "Not on the same scale as this, but I learned the basics growing up. I can help with more than just housework if you need it." "Can you ride?" Ethan asked. "Well enough. I am not fancy about it, but I can stay on a horse." An idea formed in his mind, one he pushed away immediately. It was too soon, too presumptuous. But the thought lingered. Having someone to help with the ranch work, someone who understood the life that could change everything. He could expand as he had been planning, take on more stock, improve the bloodlines of his herd. After dinner, Katherine gravitated to the piano again, this time asking permission with her eyes. Ethan nodded, settling into his chair with the ranch ledgers he had been neglecting. But he could not focus on the numbers as Katherine played, her music weaving through the room like something alive. She played hymns and folk songs, pieces that seemed to come from deep in her memory, and each one carried emotion that the worn piano could not quite contain. When she finally stopped, Ethan realized he had been sitting with the same page open for an hour. "I should let you work," Katherine said apologetically. "I get lost in the music sometimes." "Do not stop on my account," Ethan said. "It is good to hear the piano played again. My mother would have liked knowing it was being used." Katherine's expression softened. "She must have been a special woman to have raised a son who would help a stranger the way you have helped me." Ethan looked down at the ledger, uncomfortable with the praise. "I am not doing anything extraordinary. You needed help, and I needed a housekeeper. It is a fair trade." "Perhaps," Katherine said quietly, "but there is kindness in how you have done it. You could have offered me work in a much different spirit." The days began to settle into a rhythm. Ethan rose before dawn, did the early chores, and came in to breakfast that Katherine had ready. They talked little in the mornings, both of them slow to wake, but the silence was companionable rather than awkward. After breakfast, Ethan would head out to work the ranch while Katherine managed the household. But as the weeks passed, he began to notice changes beyond the clean house and good food. Katherine had planted bulbs in the garden area, preparing for spring blooms. She had mended the curtains he had not even realized were torn. She had organized his tack room in the barn, making everything easier to find. Small touches everywhere spoke of a woman's presence, a woman's care. More than that, the ranch itself seemed more alive. Katherine had taken to coming out to watch him work with the horses, and she had a natural way with the animals that surprised him. She could gentle a skittish colt with soft words and patient hands, and the horses responded to her in ways they never had to his efficient but unfeeling handling. One afternoon, about a month after her arrival, Ethan found her in the corral with a young mare that had been giving him trouble. The mare was standoffish, resistant to the saddle, and he had been considering selling her. But Katherine stood in the center of the corral, singing softly, and the mare approached her with pricked ears, curious and calm. "How did you do that?" Ethan asked from the fence. Katherine turned, not startled by his voice. "She just needed someone to listen to her. She is scared, not mean. Someone was rough with her when she was younger. You can tell that just from looking at her. I can tell from how she moves, how she holds herself. Animals are not so different from people. The ones who seem the most difficult are often just the most hurt." She said it matter-of-factly, but Ethan felt the words land somewhere deep inside him. He cleared his throat. "Would you like to try riding her? If you can get a saddle on her, I would be interested to see how she does." Katherine's face lit up. "Really? You would trust me with her?" "I trust you," Ethan said, and realized as he said it that it was true. In the weeks Katherine had been at the ranch, she had proven herself capable, honest, and hardworking. More than that, she had brought life back to a place that had been slowly dying. Together they worked with the mare, and by the end of the afternoon, Katherine was riding her around the corral, both woman and horse looking pleased with themselves. Ethan watched from the fence, and when Katherine dismounted, flushed and happy, he found himself smiling for the first time in recent memory. "That was wonderful," Katherine said, stroking the mare's neck. "She has a lovely gait once she relaxes. What is her name?" "I never named her. Just called her the bay mare." Katherine looked shocked. "She needs a name. All creatures deserve a name." She studied the horse thoughtfully. What about Rosie? For her reddish coat, Rosie, Ethan repeated. It seemed frivolous, but looking at Catherine's expectant face, he nodded. Rosie it is. That evening, Catherine played the piano with particular joy, and Ethan found himself putting aside his work to simply listen. When she finished a particularly lively tune, she turned to him with a mischievous expression. You dance, Ethan Reed? The question caught him off guard. I used to. Before the war, I am probably terrible at it now. We should test that theory. She stood and held out her hand. Come on, I will play something simple. There is no music if you are dancing, Ethan pointed out. Then you will have to sing, Catherine said, or I will sing and you will dance. Either way works. Before he could think better of it, Ethan found himself standing, taking her hand. She began to hum a waltz, and they moved awkwardly around the small space between the furniture. He was rusty, stepping on her feet twice, but Catherine just laughed, a sound like bells, and kept humming. Gradually, muscle memory returned. He found the rhythm, found the pattern, and they moved together more smoothly. Catherine's hand was small in his, her waist slender under his other palm, and he became acutely aware of her proximity, the scent of soap and lavender that clung to her, the way her eyes sparkled as she looked up at him. When the dance ended, they stood close together, both breathing a bit harder. Ethan realized he had not let go of her hand and she had not pulled away. Something passed between them in that moment, unspoken but real, and it terrified him. He dropped her hand and stepped back. It is late. I should check the stock one more time before bed. He fled into the night, his heart pounding. What was he doing? Catherine was here as an employee, nothing more. She was young, beautiful, full of life and music and light. He was a broken man, scarred and silent, with nothing to offer but a lonely ranch and a heart that had forgotten how to feel. But standing in the barn, listening to her piano music drift through the darkness, Ethan could not deny the truth. Katherine Elmore had brought something back to life in him, something he thought had died with Samuel, and he did not know whether to embrace it or run from it. The next morning, things were awkward between them. Ethan was more withdrawn than usual, and Catherine seemed to sense she had pushed too far. They ate breakfast in silence, and when Ethan headed out to work, he felt her watching him go with a confused, hurt expression. He spent the day mending fences in the far pasture, working until his hands ached and his back screamed. Physical pain he could handle. It was the other kind, the kind that came from opening yourself up to another person, that he could not face. But when he returned at dusk, tired and dirty, Catherine met him on the porch with a strange expression. There is a man here to see you. He said his name is Marcus Whitfield. I gave him coffee and asked him to wait in the front room. Ethan's eyebrows rose. Marcus rarely came out to the ranch without sending word first. He cleaned up quickly and went inside to find his old friend standing by the fireplace, still in his cavalry uniform. Marcus, Ethan greeted him. This is unexpected. Marcus turned and his weathered face broke into a smile. Ethan. I was passing through on my way to Santa Fe and thought I would stop in, see how you were managing. His eyes flicked to Catherine, who had retreated to the kitchen but was clearly within earshot. See how things worked out with Miss Elmore. Working out fine, Ethan said stiffly. Catherine has been a great help around the place. I can see that. Marcus settled into a chair, looking around the transformed room with approval. Place looks better than I have ever seen it. Miss Elmore, you are a miracle worker. Catherine emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Thank you, Captain. I have only been doing my job. More than your job, I would say. Marcus accepted another cup of coffee from her. Ethan, I actually came for a reason beyond a friendly visit. There is talk of organizing a harvest dance in town next month. I thought you might like to know. Might be good for you to get out, see people. "I am not much for dances," Ethan said. "You used to be," Marcus countered, "before you decided to become a hermit." He looked at Katherine. "Miss Elmore, perhaps you could convince this stubborn friend of mine that a little socializing would not kill him." Katherine smiled slightly. "I do not think Mr. Reed takes orders from me, Captain." "Maybe he should," Marcus said with a grin. Then more seriously, "Ethan, you cannot hide out here forever. Samuel would not have wanted that." The name hung in the air like smoke. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. "Samuel is dead. What he would have wanted does not matter anymore, doesn't it?" Marcus leaned forward. "He died so you could live. What are you doing with that gift? Wasting away on this ranch alone, refusing to let anyone in. That honors his memory. How exactly?" "Marcus," Ethan growled, a warning, but his friend was relentless. "I have watched you hollow yourself out these past years. When I heard about Miss Elmore's situation, I thought maybe, just maybe, it was a chance for you to remember what it is like to have someone to live for instead of just existing day to day." "You had no right," Ethan said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I had every right. I made a promise to Samuel before he died that I would look out for you. I have not done a very good job of it." Marcus stood. "Come to the dance, both of you. Let people see you are still among the living. You do not have to stay long, but make the effort." After Marcus left, the house felt too quiet. Katherine busied herself with dinner preparations, and Ethan sat brooding by the fire. Finally, Katherine spoke from the kitchen. "I am sorry if I caused trouble between you and your friend." "You did not cause anything," Ethan said. "Marcus has been trying to fix my life since the war ended. He means well. He cares about you. That is obvious." Katherine paused. "You do not have to take me to the dance. I understand if it is too much." Ethan looked at her, really looked at her. She stood in the doorway, flower on her apron, a strand of hair escaping its pins, and she was so alive, so present that it almost hurt to see her. When had she become so essential to his days? When had he started listening for her footsteps in the morning, her voice raised in song, her laughter when something amused her? "You want to go?" he asked. Katherine considered the question. "I have not been to a dance in years. It might be nice, but only if you want to go. I will not force you into something that makes you uncomfortable." "I will think about it," Ethan said, which was more than he had intended to concede. Over the next weeks, Ethan found himself watching Katherine differently. He noticed the grace in her movements, the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, the small smile that played at her lips when she was pleased with something. He noticed that she always served him the best portions of food, that she mended his clothes without being asked, that she had started leaving the lamp burning in the window on nights he worked late. He noticed, too, how she transformed the ranch. The horses were calmer, healthier. The house felt like a home instead of a structure. Even the cattle seemed to respond to her presence on the rare occasions she rode out with him to check on them. And the music. God, the music. Every evening she played, and every evening he found excuses to be in the house to listen. She had found Samuel's fiddle one day while cleaning, and with tears in her eyes, she had asked if she might try to restore it. Ethan had nodded, unable to speak, and over several evenings she had carefully cleaned it, tightened the strings, rosined the bow. The first time she played it, Ethan had to leave the room, the sound too much like Samuel coming back from the dead, but Katherine found him on the porch and sat beside him in the darkness. "I am sorry," she said softly. "I should have asked before I played it." "No," Ethan managed. "It is good to hear it again. Samuel loved that fiddle. He would want it to be played." They sat in silence for a while, then Katherine said, "Tell me about him," and Ethan did. For the first time since Samuel's death, he talked about his brother. About how Samuel had been the light-hearted one, quick to laugh, always seeing the good in people. About how he had been barely 20 when he died, shot by a rustler he had been trying to talk down instead of shoot. About how Ethan had watched him bleed out on the dusty ground, unable to save him, unable to do anything but hold him as the light left his eyes. Katherine listened without interrupting, and when he finished, she took his hand. Her palm was warm against his, and he felt something in his chest crack open. "He sounds like he was a wonderful person," she said. "And I am certain he would hate knowing that his death has kept you from living." "Everyone keeps saying that," Ethan said roughly, "because it is true." Katherine squeezed his hand. "Ethan, I do not know what you think you are atoning for by punishing yourself, but surviving when someone you love dies is not a sin. It is a tragedy, but it is not your fault." "I should have been faster," Ethan said. "I should have seen the rustler in the rocks. I should have protected him. You should have been a lot of things, I am sure. We all should have. But we are only human, and humans make mistakes, and sometimes terrible things happen despite our best efforts." She stood, still holding his hand, and pulled him to his feet. "Samuel is gone, and that is heartbreaking. But you are here. You are alive. And you get to choose whether to honor his memory by living fully or by slowly fading away. Which do you think he would want?" The question hung between them, and Ethan had no answer. But that night, after Katherine went to bed, he took out Samuel's fiddle and held it, running his fingers over the smooth wood. And for the first time in 4 years, he let himself cry, great wrenching sobs that shook his whole body, grieving properly for the brother he had lost, and the years he had wasted in hollow existence. The next morning he came to breakfast with red-rimmed eyes, but something in his expression was different. Katherine saw it and smiled, a small, knowing smile that asked no questions. "I have been thinking," Ethan said as they ate, "about the dance. If you still want to go, I will take you." Katherine's face lit up. "I would like that. Thank you. You will need a dress," Ethan continued, warming to the idea now that he had committed to it. "Something nicer than what you have for working around the ranch. There is a dressmaker in town, Martha Henderson. She is good and fair with her prices." "I have a little money saved," Katherine began, but Ethan shook his head. "Consider it part of your wages. You have earned it 10 times over with all the work you have done here." They rode into Raton 2 days later, and Ethan noticed how people watched them, curious and speculating. He realized that in the month Katherine had been at the ranch, he had not brought her to town, had not introduced her to anyone. She must have felt completely isolated, but she had never complained. Martha Henderson was a widow in her 50s who ran the dress shop with ruthless efficiency and a keen eye for what suited people. She took one look at Katherine and started pulling fabrics and patterns. "Blue," she declared. "With your coloring, you need something in blue, and none of this practical nonsense. If Ethan Reed is finally taking a lady to a dance, we are going to make sure she outshines every woman there." Ethan shifted uncomfortably while Martha bustled around, draping fabrics over Katherine's shoulders, but Katherine's eyes were bright with excitement. "I have never had anything made specially for me," she admitted. "My mother always cut down her old dresses for me." "Well, you are getting something special now," Martha said firmly. "Ethan, make yourself useful and go have coffee at the hotel. This will take a while." Dismissed, Ethan found himself walking down the street, nodding to acquaintances he had been avoiding for months. He stopped at the general store for supplies, and the owner, Tom Fitzgerald, greeted him warmly. "Good to see you in town, Ethan. Heard you took in that lady who was meant for Bill Thornton. Decent of you." "She needed work and I needed help," Ethan said, uncomfortable with the praise. Sure, Tom said with a knowing look. "She is a pretty thing, if you do not mind my saying. Seems sensible too, from what I have heard. You could do worse." Ethan did not dignify that with a response, but as he walked back to the dress shop, he found himself thinking about it. Could he do this? Could he actually imagine a future with Katherine, a real future as man and wife? The thought terrified him, but it also sent a thrill through him that he had not felt in years. When he returned, Martha shooed him away again, saying the dress would be ready in a week. Ethan and Katherine rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence, but he could feel the shift between them, something changing and deepening. That evening, Katherine played Samuel's fiddle, and this time Ethan stayed in the room, listening. She played a lively reel, her fingers dancing over the strings, and when she finished, she lowered the instrument with a satisfied smile. "I am rusty, but it is coming back," she said. "You play beautifully," Ethan said. "Samuel would have been honored to have you play his fiddle." Katherine's expression softened. "I wish I could have met him. From everything you have told me, he sounds like he was a special person." He was. Ethan stood and crossed to where she sat. "Katherine, I want to thank you." "For what?" "For bringing life back to this place. For bringing music back. For reminding me what it is like to feel something other than grief and guilt." The words came haltingly, but they were true, and he needed her to know it. Katherine set down the fiddle and stood, looking up at him with those clear gray eyes. "You are welcome." "But Ethan, you did that yourself. I just provided the occasion." They stood close together, and Ethan felt the pull between them, strong as a current. He raised his hand, hesitated, then gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Katherine's breath caught, and he saw awareness dawn in her eyes, the same awareness that was coursing through him. "Katherine," he began, not sure what he wanted to say, but she stepped back, a blush coloring her cheeks. "I should prepare something for tomorrow's meals, if you will excuse me." She fled to the kitchen, and Ethan stood alone, his hand still raised, feeling like he had lost something precious before he even had the chance to claim it. The week until the dance passed in a strange tension. Ethan and Katherine were polite, careful around each other, but there were moments when their hands would brush, reaching for the same thing, when their eyes would meet and hold for a heartbeat too long, when the air between them seemed to crackle with possibility. Ethan found himself working on the house with new purpose, repairing things he had ignored for years. He fixed the porch railing, repainted the shutters, even cleared out the spare room that he had been using for storage, though he could not have said why. Katherine watched these efforts with a small smile but said nothing. The day of the dance arrived cool and clear, perfect autumn weather. Ethan put on his best clothes, a white shirt and black vest and trousers that he had not worn since before Samuel's death. He shaved carefully, trimmed his hair, and tried not to think too hard about why he was making such an effort. When Katherine emerged from her room, Ethan felt his breath stop. The blue dress Martha had made fit perfectly, highlighting Katherine's slender figure and bringing out the color of her eyes. Her dark hair was pinned up in an elaborate style, with a few curls left loose to frame her face. She looked beautiful and nervous and so lovely that Ethan could not find words. "Will I do?" Katherine asked, turning in a slow circle. "You are beautiful," Ethan managed, his voice rough. Katherine blushed, pleased. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The ride to town felt shorter than usual, though that might have been because Ethan was dreading and anticipating it in equal measure. He had not been to a social event in years, and he knew people would talk, would speculate about him and Katherine. Part of him did not care, but part of him worried about what it might mean for her reputation. The dance was being held in the town hall, and by the time they arrived, it was already crowded with ranchers, merchants, miners, and their families. A small group of musicians was tuning up on a makeshift stage, and tables laden with food lined one wall. The whole place buzzed with conversation and laughter. Heads turned as Ethan entered with Katherine on his arm. He saw surprise, curiosity, and in some cases, approval on familiar faces. Marcus appeared almost immediately, grinning broadly. "You came. I did not think you would actually do it." He bowed to Katherine. "Miss Elmore, you look absolutely lovely. May I have the honor of introducing you to some of the local ladies? I think you will find them welcoming once they get over their shock at seeing Ethan at a social event." Katherine glanced at Ethan, who nodded. She allowed Marcus to lead her away, and Ethan watched her go, feeling oddly bereft. But then, Tom Fitzgerald clapped him on the shoulder, and he was pulled into conversation with men he had been avoiding for months. It was not as difficult as he had feared. People seemed genuinely glad to see him, and no one pressed too hard with questions about Katherine or his long absence from town life. He found himself relaxing slightly, accepting a glass of punch, talking about cattle and weather, and the railroad's progress through the territory. But his eyes kept tracking Katherine across the room. Marcus had indeed introduced her to a group of women, and she seemed to be getting along well, her smile genuine as she conversed. Several young men had already approached her, clearly hoping to secure a dance, and Ethan felt an unexpected surge of possessiveness. When the music started, Ethan made his way through the crowd to Katherine's side. She was being chatted up by a young rancher from a neighboring property, but when she saw Ethan, her face lit up in a way that made his heart skip. "May I have this dance?" Ethan asked, extending his hand. "Of course." Katherine took his hand and they moved to the dance floor. It was a simple waltz, and this time Ethan did not stumble. They moved together smoothly, Katherine light in his arms, and Ethan felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. This was where she belonged, here with him, and pretending otherwise was foolish. "Are you having a good time?" Katherine asked as they turned. "Better than I expected," Ethan admitted. "You?" "Yes, everyone has been very kind, though I suspect I am the subject of considerable speculation." "Let them speculate." Ethan looked down at her, and the words came without planning. "Katherine, I need to tell you something." Her eyes widened slightly. "Now, here, maybe not here," Ethan conceded, realizing the middle of a crowded dance floor was perhaps not the ideal location. "Later, after the dance." "All right," Katherine agreed, though he could see curiosity and something else, something that looked like hope in her expression. They danced 3 more dances together, then Ethan reluctantly yielded her to other partners while he talked with acquaintances. But he was always aware of where she was, who she was dancing with, the sound of her laughter cutting through the general din. Marcus found him near the refreshment table. "You are staring at her like a lovesick calf," he observed. "I am not staring," Ethan protested. "You absolutely are." "But I am glad. She is good for you, Ethan. Anyone can see that. The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I am going to talk to her, tonight." The decision had solidified sometime during the evening, and now it felt inevitable, right? "Good man." Marcus raised his glass in a toast. "Samuel would approve, you know. He always said you needed someone to gentle you, bring out your better nature." "Samuel talked too much," Ethan said, but there was affection in his voice. The dance wound down eventually, people drifting home as the hour grew late. Ethan helped Katherine into the wagon, and they started the ride back to the ranch under a sky brilliant with stars. The night was cool but not cold, and Katherine tilted her head back to look at the heavens. "I have never seen so many stars," she said softly. "In the city, you cannot see them like this." "It is one of the things I love about this land," Ethan said. "The sky seems to go on forever." They rode in silence for a while, then Katherine said, "You wanted to tell me something." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. This was it, the moment he had been building toward all evening, perhaps all month. "Yes, I am not good with words, Katherine, so you will have to bear with me." "Take your time," she said gently. When you first came here, I thought I was doing you a favor, giving you a job until you could figure out what to do next. I thought you would stay a few weeks, maybe a month, and then move on. I never expected." He paused, searching for the right words. "I never expected you to change everything." Katherine was quiet, waiting. This ranch, it was just a place where I existed. I worked, I ate, I slept, and I tried not to think too much about anything. I had convinced myself that was enough, that it was all I deserved after Samuel died. And then you came with your music and your laughter and your refusal to let things stay broken. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to face her. "You brought light into a dark place, Katherine. You brought life back to a dead man, and somewhere along the way I fell in love with you." Katherine's eyes shone with tears in the starlight. "Ethan," she whispered, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You came here thinking you would marry someone else, and you have been kind enough to work for me when your plans fell through. But Katherine, if there is any chance that you might feel something for me too, I am asking you to stay. Not as my housekeeper, but as my wife. I will spend every day trying to deserve you, trying to be the kind of man who can make you happy. I cannot promise it will always be easy, but I can promise that I will love you with everything I have." The silence stretched, and Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He had laid himself bare, and now he could only wait. Then Katherine smiled, and it was like the sun rising. "Ethan Reid, I fell in love with you the first time I heard you laugh. It was about 2 weeks after I arrived. You were working with one of the horses, and something she did made you laugh, really laugh, and I thought it was the most wonderful sound I had ever heard. I knew then that this solemn, silent man had a whole world of feeling locked up inside, and I wanted to be the one to help you find it again." "Is that a yes?" Ethan asked, hardly daring to breathe. "That is absolutely a yes." Katherine leaned toward him, and Ethan met her halfway, kissing her gently at first, then more deeply as she responded. She tasted like punch and joy, and Ethan felt the last of his walls crumble away. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Katherine laughed. "I suppose I should have asked for references before accepting a proposal from my employer." "Too late now," Ethan said, grinning. "You are stuck with me." "I can think of worse fates," Katherine said, and kissed him again. They talked the whole ride home, making plans, sharing hopes and dreams they had each thought lost. Ethan told her about his ideas for expanding the ranch, and Katherine talked about starting a real garden come spring, maybe even getting some chickens. They spoke of small things and large, weaving together a vision of a shared future. At the ranch, Ethan helped Katherine down from the wagon and then did not let her go, holding her close under the stars. "I want to marry you as soon as possible," he said. "Unless you want a big wedding with lots of planning." "I do not need anything fancy," Katherine assured him. "Just you and me and someone to say the words. Everything else is extra." "I will talk to Pastor Williams tomorrow," Ethan promised. "We can be married by the end of the week if you are willing." "I am more than willing." Katherine rested her head against his chest, and Ethan felt peace settle over him for the first time in years. True to his word, Ethan rode into town the next morning and arranged everything with the pastor. Word spread quickly, as it always did in small towns, and by the time Ethan returned to the ranch, he had been stopped half a dozen times by well-wishers offering congratulations and advice. The wedding took place the following Saturday in the small church in Raton. Marcus stood up as Ethan's best man, and Martha Henderson, who had become fast friends with Katherine, served as her attendant. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, and when the pastor pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed Katherine with a joy he had thought he would never feel again. They held a small reception at the ranch, with Marcus and a few close friends in attendance. Katherine played the piano, and someone produced a guitar, and they had music and laughter and food late into the evening. Ethan watched his new wife move among the guests, making everyone feel welcome, and he marveled that she was his, that this bright, beautiful woman had chosen him. When the guests finally left and they were alone, Ethan took Katherine's hand and led her to the bedroom they would now share. He had spent the previous day making it as nice as he could, fresh linens, flowers from the garden, and he was rewarded by Katherine's delighted smile. "You did all this for me?" she asked. "For us," Ethan corrected and drew her into his arms. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that went beyond the physical into something deeper. Afterward, lying with Katherine's head on his chest, her hair spread across the pillow, Ethan felt complete for the first time since before the war. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Katherine replied, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Thank you for finding me, for giving me a home. Thank you for bringing music back into my life," Ethan said, "for reminding me that there are things worth living for." They fell asleep entwined, and Ethan's dreams for once were peaceful. The first year of their marriage was a time of adjustment and growth. Katherine threw herself into making the ranch a true home, planting a vegetable garden that flourished under her care, starting a small flock of chickens, even convincing Ethan to let her try her hand at raising a few dairy cows. Everything she touched seemed to prosper. Ethan, for his part, found himself more ambitious than he had been in years. With Katherine's help and encouragement, he expanded his cattle operation, improved his breeding stock, and began to build a reputation for quality beef. The ranch prospered, but more than that, it became a place of life and laughter again. They made friends in town, attending church regularly, hosting dinners for neighbors. Katherine started a small music circle, teaching piano to children whose parents could pay and some who could not. The sound of young voices singing hymns or struggling through scales became a regular feature of their evenings, and Ethan found he did not mind the noise. On Sundays, they visited Samuel's grave together, and Katherine would place wildflowers on the headstone while Ethan talked to his brother, telling him about the ranch, about Katherine, about the life they were building. It helped, having Katherine there, and gradually the visits became less painful and more a celebration of Samuel's memory. One evening, about 14 months into their marriage, Katherine came to Ethan with a shy smile and took his hand, placing it on her belly. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. Ethan stared at her, the news taking a moment to sink in. Then he laughed, a great booming laugh of pure joy, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she protested that he was making her dizzy. "A baby," he repeated, setting her down carefully. "When? Late spring, the doctor thinks. April or May." Katherine's eyes shone with happiness. "Are you pleased?" "Pleased does not begin to cover it," Ethan said, kissing her soundly. "Terrified, excited, grateful, all of those things. But mostly just so incredibly happy." They prepared for the baby's arrival with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Ethan converted the spare room into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands from beautiful pine he had been saving for something special. Katherine sewed tiny gowns and blankets, singing softly as she worked. As her pregnancy progressed, Ethan became increasingly protective, insisting she rest more, take on fewer chores. Katherine tolerated his hovering with amused patience, though she drew the line when he suggested she stop playing the piano. "The baby likes music," she informed him. "He kicks every time I play. I am not giving that up." "He?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow, "or she?" "Either way." Katherine smiled. "Do you have a preference?" "Healthy," Ethan said firmly. "That is my only preference. Healthy baby, healthy wife." The baby arrived on a warm evening in late April 1878 after a labor that seemed to last forever to Ethan's anxious mind. The doctor and Martha Henderson, who had insisted on being present, finally emerged from the bedroom in the early morning hours to announce that he had a son. Ethan rushed into the room to find Katherine pale but smiling, holding a small bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Meet your son," she said softly. Ethan approached carefully, hardly daring to breathe. Katherine pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny, red face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth opening in a wide yawn. The baby had a shock of dark hair and the most perfect little hands Ethan had ever seen. "He is beautiful," Ethan whispered, reaching out to touch one small hand. The baby's fingers immediately curled around his larger one, gripping with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Katherine asked. Ethan had been thinking about this for months. "Samuel," he said quietly. "If that is all right with you, Samuel Ethan Reid, so he can carry his uncle's name forward." Katherine smiled through her tears. "Samuel is perfect." Fatherhood transformed Ethan in ways he never expected. He had thought himself content with Katherine, complete, but holding his son added a dimension to his life he had not known was missing. Young Samuel was a good baby, quick to smile, and as he grew, it became clear he had inherited his mother's musical nature. He would fall asleep to Katherine's piano playing and wake up happy when she sang. When Samuel was 6 months old, Ethan took him out to the barn and showed him the horses, the cattle, the land that would one day be his. "Your uncle would have loved you," he told the baby, who looked around with wide, curious eyes. "He would have taught you to ride and shoot and all the practical things, but your mother will teach you music and kindness and how to see the beauty in the world. Between the two, you will be a fine man." Katherine found him there, talking seriously to their son, and her heart swelled with love for both of them. This man who had been so closed off, so determined to live in darkness, had become the most devoted father and husband she could have asked for. The years passed quickly after that, full and rich. A second child, a daughter they named Rose after the mare that had first brought Katherine into the corrals, arrived 2 years after Samuel. She was followed 2 years later by another boy, whom they named Marcus after Ethan's friend, who had brought them together. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Ethan took on hired hands to help with the expanding operation, and the ranch house itself was enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Through it all, music remained the heartbeat of their home. Katherine played piano every evening, and as the children grew, she taught them. Samuel showed particular aptitude for the fiddle, and Ethan eventually gave him the one that had been his Uncle Samuel's, restored and ready to make music again. On their 10th anniversary, Ethan took Katherine up to a hilltop that overlooked the ranch. They stood together, his arm around her waist, looking down at the sprawling operation below. Cattle grazed in the pastures, smoke rose from the chimney of the house, and they could see the children playing in the yard under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands. "Do you remember when you first arrived?" Ethan asked. "How silent everything was." "I remember," Katherine said. "I remember thinking this was the most beautiful, loneliest place I had ever seen." "It is not lonely anymore," Ethan said. "You filled it with music and light, just like you filled my heart. I was a dead man walking when you came into my life, Katherine. You brought me back." Katherine turned to face him, reaching up to touch his face. "We brought each other back. I was running from a life that had no joy, no purpose. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to wake up smiling every day." They kissed, and it was as sweet and full of promise as their first kiss had been all those years ago. As the sun set, Painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, they walked back down to the house hand in hand. The sound of children's laughter mixed with music drifted on the evening air. Young Samuel was practicing his fiddle, the notes clear and true, while Rose sang along in a voice that was already showing signs of being as lovely as her mother's. Ethan paused on the porch, listening. "This is everything I never knew I needed," he said quietly. "This is home," Katherine agreed, squeezing his hand. They went inside together, into the warm, music-filled house, and Ethan sent up a silent thank you to the brother he had lost and the friend who had brought Katherine into his life. The silence that had once defined his existence was long gone, replaced by the beautiful chaos of a life fully lived, a heart fully opened, and a love that grew deeper with each passing day. The children grew, as children do, and each one brought their own personality to the family. Samuel, the eldest, was serious and responsible, with his father's quiet strength and his mother's musical gift. Rose was bright and mischievous, always into something, keeping everyone on their toes. Marcus, the youngest for several years, was the peacemaker, gentle and kind. When Rose was 5, Katherine discovered she was expecting again. This pregnancy was harder than the others, and Ethan worried constantly, but Katherine remained calm and confident. "I am tougher than I look," she reminded him with a smile. Their 4th child, a girl they named Grace, arrived in the winter of 1885, a tiny thing with lungs that could wake the whole house. She thrived despite her small size, and as she grew, it became clear she had inherited her father's determination and her mother's joy in living. The ranch house was never quiet anymore, always full of children's voices, music, laughter, and the occasional argument. Ethan had built additions twice to accommodate everyone, and there was talk of building a separate bunkhouse for the older boys as they grew. On Sundays, the whole family would ride into town for church, and they became a familiar sight, Ethan and Katherine leading the procession with the younger children, the older ones following on their own horses. People in town often remarked on how devoted the Reed family was, how the children were being raised with love and discipline in equal measure. Marcus Whitfield, now retired from the cavalry, had settled in Raton and became a regular visitor to the ranch. He delighted in the children, bringing them small gifts and telling them highly embellished stories of their father's exploits during the war. Ethan would protest the exaggerations, but Katherine loved seeing him through Marcus's eyes, the hero her friend described matching the man she knew him to be. One evening, when Samuel was 12 and beginning to take on real responsibilities around the ranch, Ethan took him up to the hilltop where he had stood with Katherine years before. "Someday, all of this will be yours," Ethan told his son, gesturing at the land below. "You and your brothers and sisters will share it, but it is not just land, Samuel, it is a legacy. Your mother and I built this together, and we want you children to understand what matters." "What matters, Pa?" Samuel asked, serious as always. "Family, love. Being there for each other no matter what. The land provides for us, but it is the people we share it with that make it worth having." Ethan paused. "You are named after my brother, and I want to tell you about him." Father and son sat on the hilltop as the sun set, and Ethan told stories he had not shared in years. Stories about Samuel Reed, about the war, about loss and grief and learning to live again. Young Samuel listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, and when they finally rode back down to the ranch, Ethan felt like another piece of the past had been properly honored and laid to rest. As the children grew into young adults, they each found their own paths. Samuel stayed on the ranch, a natural heir who loved the land as much as his father did. Rose surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business, and she began keeping the ranch's books and negotiating sales with a shrewdness that made both her parents proud. Marcus decided he wanted to study to be a doctor, and though it meant he would have to go east for his education, Ethan and Katherine supported his dream. Grace, still young but already showing strong opinions, declared she would be a music teacher like her mother. Through all of it, Ethan and Katherine remained the center, the steady foundation on which their children built their lives. They had their disagreements, as any couple married for years would, but they had learned early how to talk through problems, how to compromise, how to never let anger fester. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, the house and yard filled with people, music, laughter, and joy. Martha Henderson, now in her 70s but still spry, brought a beautiful cake she had made herself. Marcus gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in turns. But the best moment came late in the evening when young Samuel took out his fiddle and Rose sat at the piano. Together, they played while their parents danced, and watching them, Ethan was struck by how far they had all come. From silence and grief to this, a house full of life and love and music. "What are you thinking?" Katherine asked as they swayed to the music. "That I am the luckiest man alive," Ethan said. "That I found you or you found me, and together we built something beautiful. We did not we?" Katherine smiled up at him. "I came west expecting one thing and found something so much better." "What did you expect?" Ethan asked, curious. They had never really talked about William Thornton or what she had thought her life would be like if he had lived. "I expected to be useful," Katherine said thoughtfully. "To have a role, a purpose. I expected to make a life, a practical arrangement that might grow into affection over time." She paused, looking around at their children, their friends, their home. "What I found was a partner, a love story that took my breath away, a family that fills my heart to overflowing. I expected duty and got passion. I expected silence and got music. I expected to live in darkness the rest of my days," Ethan said quietly. "I expected to carry my grief like a burden until it finally crushed me. And then you came and brought light to every corner of my life. You saved me, Katherine." "We saved each other," Katherine corrected. "That is what love does. It saves us from ourselves, from our worst impulses, from the darkness that would consume us if we let it." They danced until the music stopped, and then they danced some more, the children playing on, delighted to see their parents so happy. It was late when the last guest finally left, and Ethan and Katherine stood on the porch, arms around each other, looking out at the land they had built a life on. 20 years, Katherine mused. "Where did the time go?" "Into living," Ethan said. "Every moment, every day we lived fully." That is where the time went. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes both expected and unexpected. Marcus went east to study medicine as planned and came back 5 years later with a degree and a lovely wife named Sarah. They settled in Raton, and Marcus opened a practice that quickly became indispensable to the community. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a sensible girl named Emma who fit into the family seamlessly. They built a house on the far side of the ranch land and began raising cattle of their own under Ethan's guidance. Within 2 years, they had given Ethan and Katherine their first grandchild, a boy they named Ethan Samuel Reid. Rose shocked everyone by falling in love with a teacher who came to Raton to start a school. He was a quiet, bookish man who seemed like an odd match for Rose's vibrant personality, but they adored each other, and Ethan learned once again that love did not always follow logical patterns. Grace did indeed become a music teacher, and she also started leading the church choir. Her voice was the finest of all the children, pure and clear, and hearing her sing always reminded Ethan of the first time he had heard Catherine's voice raised in song, how it had pierced straight through to his heart. As Ethan and Katherine grew older, they gradually turned over more of the ranch's operations to Samuel and Emma, though Ethan never fully retired. He liked being out with the cattle, liked the physical work, liked having a purpose. But he also made time for other things now. Time to spend with Katherine, with their grandchildren, with friends. On their 30th anniversary, Katherine gave Ethan a gift that brought tears to his eyes. It was a photograph she had commissioned, a portrait of their entire family, children and grandchildren, all gathered together at the ranch. Looking at the faces staring back at him, Ethan was overwhelmed by the realization of how much life he and Katherine had created together. "This is everything," he told her, his voice thick with emotion. "Everyone in this picture exists because you came into my life and refused to let me stay in the darkness. They exist because we loved each other," Katherine corrected gently. "Because we chose each other every day, through good times and hard times, and we built something that will outlast us both." She was right, of course. The ranch would continue through their children and grandchildren. The music would continue through Grace and the students she taught. The love they had built would ripple out through generations yet unborn. As they grew older still, into their 60s and then 70s, Ethan and Katherine settled into a peaceful rhythm. Samuel ran the ranch now, with his own sons helping, but Ethan still offered advice when asked. Katherine still played the piano every evening, though arthritis made it harder, and her hair was now more silver than dark. One spring evening, almost 40 years after Katherine had first arrived in Raton, they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. Ethan held Katherine's hand, noting how thin it had become, how fragile but still strong enough to squeeze his in return. "You remember the first time I heard you sing?" Ethan asked. "It was the day you arrived. You were cleaning the house and you were singing something and I stood in the barn just listening. I remember wondering if you minded," Katherine said with a smile. "You seemed so stern, so serious. I thought maybe I was being presumptuous, filling your house with noise. It was not noise. It was life." Ethan brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me back my life, Katherine. Every day with you has been a gift I never thought I deserved but tried to be worthy of anyway." "You were always worthy," Katherine said firmly. "You just could not see it through the grief." "But Ethan, you were a good man when I met you, and you have been a good man every day since. I could not have asked for a better partner in this life." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. From inside the house, they could hear young voices, great-grandchildren now, squealing with delight as someone played a game with them. Life continued, rolling on like a river, and Ethan felt at peace with his place in its flow. Katherine died in her sleep on a quiet winter morning in her 82nd year. She had been slowing down for some time, but her mind remained sharp, her smile warm, her love for her family undimmed. Ethan woke that morning to find her beside him, peaceful and still, finally at rest after a long, full life. The grief hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment he was back in that dark place he had inhabited before she came into his life. But then he heard her voice in his memory, telling him that living fully was how you honored those you lost, and he knew what he had to do. He lived 3 more years after Katherine passed. Years he spent surrounded by family, telling stories about her to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who had never known a world without her music. He made sure her piano was kept in tune, that someone played it regularly so it would not fall silent. He visited her grave every Sunday, just as they had visited Samuel's together, and he talked to her about the ranch, the family, the life that continued in her absence. On the morning of his 85th birthday, surrounded by 3 generations of the family he and Katherine had created, Ethan Reed closed his eyes and did not wake again. He died as he had lived the last 43 years of his life, in peace and love, his heart full. They buried him beside Katherine on a hilltop overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue and vast, it seemed to go on forever. Samuel, now an old man himself, played his great-uncle's fiddle at the service, and Grace led the family in singing hymns that would have made Katherine smile. Years later, when the grandchildren were old and the great-grandchildren had children of their own, they would still tell the story of Ethan and Katherine Reed. How he had been a man who expected silence, living half alive in grief and guilt. How she had come west to marry a stranger and ended up with a different man entirely. How together they had built a legacy of love and music that echoed through the generations. The ranch still stood, now run by the 4th generation, still prosperous, still home to the descendants of the couple who had built it with faith and hard work and unwavering love. And in the house, carefully maintained and honored, Katherine's piano still held pride of place in the front room, played regularly by whoever in the family had the gift for it. Because that was what love did. It created beauty that outlasted the lovers themselves. It built legacies that rippled out through time. And it proved that even the most broken hearts could be healed, even the darkest silences could be filled with music, even the loneliest souls could find their way home. Ethan had expected silence, but Katherine came and filled his world with music and light. Together, they created something beautiful that would never truly fade, as long as there were descendants to remember, to play the old piano, to tell the story of how love had saved them both and built an empire of joy on the foundations of grief transformed. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew down from the mountains and through the valley where the ranch stood, some swore they could still hear music drifting on the breeze, Katherine's voice raised in song, Ethan's deep laughter following, the sound of a love that death itself could not silence.